Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. For those of you guys who are new here, hi, my name is Bongi and I post true crime videos on this channel, so if that's something that you're interested in, please click on my channel and check it out because I have a couple of videos posted already. And also don't forget to subscribe and turn on your post notifications so that you don't miss out on any of my future uploads. Today's video is going to be on the disappearance and murder of Leigh Matthews, and I must warn you guys that this is going to be a very heartbreaking and frustrating case, and you'll see what I mean by that in a few. But before I get into it, you guys already know that I have to issue out my usual disclaimer that I mean absolutely no disrespect to anybody that I'm going to be talking about in today's video and all the families that were and are affected by this case. This video is purely for educational purposes, and all the information that I'm going to be talking about in this video was gotten off of the internet and simply compiled into one video. With that being said, let's get right into the case. Leigh Matthews was born on the 8th of July 1983 to father Rob Matthews and mother Sharon Matthews. She had an older sister called Karen, and the family all lived together in Four Ways in Johannesburg. Leigh was described as a soft-spoken and sweet young woman who liked to do things correctly and didn't like being the center of attention. She would blush and sometimes hide whenever she was put on the spot, and a lot of eyes were on her, you know, like she was shy. And in 2004, she was a BCom finance student at Bongi University's Morningside campus, and she was a diligent student with pretty much a bright future ahead of her. On the 8th of July 2004, Leigh and her family and friends spent the evening together at a Chinese restaurant in Cyril Dean to celebrate her 21st birthday. This was not the actual party, this was just a get-together to celebrate her birthday on the day, but they were gonna have a Pirates of the Caribbean themed party during the weekends to properly celebrate her 21st birthday. At this get-together, Leigh's parents gave her a tanzanite ring that she promised to cherish forever, and her parents believed her when she said this because she had wanted a tanzanite ring for a long time. Apparently her mother had a similar ring, and Leigh would just always make comments like, "Oh, I wish I had such a ring," or "Your ring is so pretty." So when her parents got it for her, she was pretty happy and excited, and they knew that she meant everything that she was saying on that night. On the morning of July 9th, Leigh's mother watched as Leigh just cleaned her ring and put it in her pocket and said that she didn't want to wear it because she didn't want it to get damaged, but she did want to carry it around with her everywhere she went. So her mother just smiled and Leigh left and went to school. When she got to school, she noticed that she had her mother's credit card on her, and she texted her mother to inform her of this, and that's when the two both arranged that they would meet up at 10 a.m. when Leigh's classes ended. They were gonna meet up at the campus gate, and Leigh would give Sharon her card and they would both continue with their days separately, you know. So 10 a.m. came by and Leigh headed out. One of her classmates saw her walk out of the building, and apparently they waved at each other. And another one of Leigh's classmates also saw her speaking to a man, but she couldn't really see who the man was, and she didn't really think much of it, so she just went on with her day. Shortly after 10 a.m., Sharon arrived at the campus, but there was no sign of Leigh. So she waited and waited and waited, and 20 minutes later, when Leigh still didn't show up, she finally decided to call her, but her phone was off. So this is when Sharon started panicking, and she called Rob to inform him of this, and Rob just told him to come down. There was probably a misunderstanding between the two of you. Just come down, there's not much going on, just come down. And Sharon left the campus. At around the same time, Leigh's friends were waiting for her at a shopping center because they had plans to have lunch together and also go present shopping for a friend. But again, Leigh didn't show up, and the friends waited for her for a couple of minutes, and when she didn't show up, they continued with their day. As the day kept going, both her parents grew worried because it was very unlikely to just have her phone off for so long, and they kept calling her, but her phone was still off. And so when Sharon finally received a call from Leigh's phone, she was really relieved and excited, but when she picked it up, it wasn't Leigh on the other end of the phone call. It was actually a man who was claiming that he had taken Leigh. He told Sharon that he was a Libyan man and that this was not his first kidnapping, so he wouldn't hesitate to kill Leigh if Rob and Sharon didn't cooperate. He also ordered them to pay him 300,000 rand and he hung up. After this call, Rob contacted a private investigator who advised him to contact the police, and that's when Rob went to Johannesburg Central Police Station to report the case. A short while after this, Sharon got another call from Leigh's phone, but this time it was Leigh on the phone. Leigh told her parents that she was okay and she begged them not to involve the police because this man had a gun and he said that he would use it on Leigh if he found out that her parents were working with the police. But of course this was already too late because Rob had already went to Johannesburg Central Police Station to report the case, and they had actually prioritized this case. They had even brought in a negotiator or a negotiating expert to coach Rob on how to talk to the kidnapper. So at around 7 p.m. when the kidnapper called again, Rob, with the advice of the negotiator, told this man that he couldn't withdraw 300,000 rand because this would be suspicious to the bank and the bank might open an investigation, but instead he could give him 50,000 rand. And although the kidnapper was a little bit agitated by this, he eventually agreed to take the amount of 50,000 rand. The police concluded that this was in fact his first kidnapping because if it wasn't, they believe that he would have put on a fight and would have at least asked for half of the 300,000 rand. But anyways, the kidnapper told Rob to drive to Grasmere Toll Plaza with the money and told him to stop at the bridge or fly over and flash his headlights 3 times. And Rob followed his instructions, but he was driving with a police officer hiding at the back of his car. As they approached the drop-off location, Rob became very nervous and he decided to drive to a nearby petrol station and drop the police officer off there because he believed that the police officer's presence would jeopardize Leigh's safety or something. So he dropped him off there and continued driving. And he was actually so nervous that he missed the bridge that he was supposed to stop at. And it seems as though the kidnapper was nearby or he knew what kind of car Rob drove, because immediately as Rob drove past this bridge, the kidnapper called him and he was angry and he was yelling at Rob, telling him to make a U-turn and return to the spot that they had agreed upon. So Rob drove back to the bridge and stopped, and a short while later a man approached him from behind, told him to drop the envelope to the floor, and then took it and immediately ran off before Rob could see his face. After this drop-off, Rob and Sharon were hoping to hear from the kidnapper again to tell them where he had dropped Leigh off or where they could find her, but they didn't hear back from him ever. He never called from that day. And that's when the family finally decided to involve the media with hopes that the more people knew about this case, the more leads there would be. And so they held press conferences and other things along those lines, despite the police's advice not to. Leigh's car was found at her usual parking spot at Bongi University's parking lot, but it was pretty obvious that somebody else had parked it there. Firstly, the fan was on, which was very odd because it was winter. And secondly, the driver's seat had been pushed back, suggesting that somebody way taller than Leigh had been driving the car. And the police searched the car and inspected it, but they really couldn't find much. And at this point, nobody knew whether Leigh was still alive or not, wherever she was. 12 days after Leigh's abduction, on the 21st of July, Elliot Makubela, a 40-year-old municipal worker, went to cut grass at a field in Walkerville with his nephew, 25-year-old Samuel Makubela. It was around 3 p.m. and they were done cutting the grass that they had been working on for a couple of days. So they decided to just walk around to see where they would start cutting grass at the following day. And Samuel ran ahead and Elliot was walking at a safe distance behind him. And suddenly Elliot heard him yell, "Uncle, uncle, come see a Poppy, a doll." And Samuel really thought that it was a doll, but upon closer inspection he realized that it was not a doll. It was actually a naked and dead human body. So he told his uncle that, oh no, it's actually not a doll, it's a dead person. And that's when they called other grass cutters and they all just looked at this person. They also tried to call the police, but it didn't seem as though the police had any intentions of coming. So a few of them, including Elliot, ran to the road and they tried to flag down a couple of police cars, but the police cars didn't stop. They kept driving, and after about an hour or so of waiting, Elliot came across two Indian men, and he walked up to them and told them what they had discovered, and these two Indian men helped him contact the police, and that's when the police showed up to the scene. Later on that afternoon, it was confirmed that this was the body of Leigh Matthews. She had been shot multiple times in the head, but there was little to no blood at the scene, and a post-mortem examination revealed that she had not been sexually assaulted at all. A pathologist also estimated that Leigh was most likely killed 10 days before her body was found, so only 2 days after her abduction. But still, there wasn't much evidence on Leigh's body or where her body was found, so the investigation was just on a standstill. That was until Superintendent Pete Bielefeld was appointed to the Leigh Matthews case. Pete Bielefeld was one of South Africa's top police officers, and he was known for catching multiple notorious criminals, including the Wimmerpan serial killer. So the superintendent went to all the 3 locations that he knew for a fact that the kidnapper had been. He first went to the Bond University parking lot, then he went to the drop-off site near Grasmere Toll Plaza, and then he went to the field in Walkerville where Leigh's body was found. He interviewed the 2 people who saw Leigh at the parking lot around 10 a.m. on the morning of Leigh's abduction, but he didn't really get much from them. He also interviewed Elliot Makubela, and Elliot told him that he had been at the field the previous day, but there was nobody there, and this suggested that the body had been dropped off once Elliot had left the field. But this only confused the police even more because the pathologist had estimated that she had been murdered 10 days before her body was found. So where was her body this whole time? And even further, her decomposition process had been slowed down, suggesting that she was kept at a cold place. But where could she have been, you know? Superintendent Pete also went back to Rob and Sharon, and he asked them to remember if at any point during the conversations with this Libyan man something weird happened, or they could hear a weird noise or sound in the background. And he was basically trying to get them to remember this because he wanted to be able to pinpoint where Leigh was held captive and possibly where this murder took place. So Rob told him that on the night of the drop-off, when he missed the bridge that he was supposed to stop at, the kidnapper actually called him and he was yelling at him. And while he was yelling at him, he actually lost his accent and sounded more Indian than Libyan. And he also told them that when he dropped the envelope on the floor, this person took it and ran like someone who was familiar with the location, like maybe a local. Investigators also took a look at Leigh's cell phone records, which indicated that her cell phone had been used at around 10 at Bongi University, and then it was used in Walkerville and then Lenasia in Johannesburg South. Lenasia happens to be a predominantly Indian community, so this would be in line with the fact that Rob said that this man sounded more Indian than Libyan while he was yelling, and also that he ran like a local because the Grasmere Toll Plaza is actually in Johannesburg South. It's near Lenasia. Bielefeld took note of all of this information and he continued with his investigation. He went back to Bongi University, but this time he went to the administration office and he began studying the names of the students who were in the same classes as Leigh, particularly those with Indian names and surnames. At the same time that he was going through the names, they were also going through phone records that were provided by the CIU, cross-referencing phone calls that took place at the same time and location that Leigh's phone was active. And one person's name kept popping up in the cell phone records as well as the list of students, and this person was Donovan Moodley. Donovan was a 24-year-old male who came from a pretty loving family. He lived with his mother, Mary, and his father, Stephen, in Alberton in Johannesburg South. Before becoming a student at Bond University, Donovan worked as a financial manager at a travel agency for about 3 or 4 years. And he also spent most of his time with his high school sweetheart, Yashika Singh. He enrolled into Bongi University in January of 2004, but he only attended classes for a short while. And despite being older than most of the students, Donovan showed the least interest in school and everything that has to do with being a student. Apparently, during exams, Donovan only wrote his name on the answer sheet, but he showed up for each and every exam, which is confusing because if he didn't want to write the exams, why did he even show up in the first place? You know? Weird. Investigators also found it interesting that a couple of weeks before Leigh's disappearance, Donovan notified the administration office that he would be dropping out. And he also had a gun registered to his name, and this was a Taurus 9mm pistol, which happened to be the same kind of gun that was used to kill Leigh Matthews. So investigators knew that they were onto something, and so they took a closer look at Donovan. So they took a look into Donovan's credit card and they realized that he had booked himself into a hotel near Bongi University a couple of days before Leigh's disappearance, and he had booked himself in for 8 days. And they also realized that there were 2 large deposits that were made into Donovan's credit card a couple of days after Rob had dropped off the ransom money. The total sum of these deposits was 38,000 rand. He also spent 10,000 rand on an engagement ring at a jewelry store in Eastgate Shopping Center. He had some repairs done to his motorcycle and even booked a hotel for Yashika and her family in Durban. All these expenses added up to about 48,000 rand in total. However, regardless of all of this circumstantial evidence, the police knew that they needed something tangible in order to arrest Donovan. So they went back to Leigh's car to see if they could find anything, and upon further inspection they actually found a discarded lottery card that had Donovan Moodley's fingerprint on it. They knew that this was Donovan Moodley's fingerprint because he had a firearm registered to his name, and the fingerprint on the lottery card matched the one on his firearm license. So this is enough for the police to make an arrest, and on the 4th of October 2004, Donovan Moodley was arrested outside his home in Alberton. Donovan was taken to the police station where he agreed to tell the police everything. However, his story had some inconsistencies. So in his confession, he said that he asked Leigh to give him a lift to a nearby intersection, and when they got there he actually pulled out a gun, pointed it at her and forced her to the back of the car, and then he drove her to a deserted park where he strangled her until she was unconscious. He then transferred her to the boot and then drove back to Bongi University. When he got here, he waited until the coast was clear, and then he transferred Leigh from her car to his car and he drove off. He drove to Walkerville where he called Sharon, Leigh's mother, and when the ransom money was dropped off, Leigh was apparently still in the car. Once he had picked up this cash, he felt like he couldn't just let Leigh go because he knew that she knew who he was and could easily report the case if she wanted to. So that's when he decided to drive to Walkerville, where he instructed her to take off all her clothes and then shot her multiple times to make sure that she was dead, and then just drove away. And I'm not sure if you guys still remember what we said earlier on in this case, so I'm gonna try to jog your memory a little bit. So firstly, Leigh's parents said that it was out of character for Leigh to just drive off knowing that her mother was on her way to fetch her credit card. So investigators and the prosecutors believe that Leigh actually agreed to give Donovan a lift, but once they were in the car, she told him that her mother was on the way, and that's when Donovan pulled out the gun, knowing that if Leigh's mother saw them together, she would know who kidnapped Leigh. So he took out the gun and told Leigh to just drive, and that's actually the reason why Leigh drove off before her mother could come by. Secondly, he said that he shot Leigh at the field where her body was found, and this is where a lot of inconsistencies arise. There was no blood at the scene because Leigh was not killed there, and Leigh was believed to have been killed 10 days before her body was found, so this was 2 days after she had been kidnapped. But Elliot Makubela said that he had been at the field the day before finding Leigh's body, and the body was not there, so Leigh was probably kept somewhere else. Also, if Leigh was killed and left there 2 days after her abduction, obviously her body would have started decomposing, and in fact it would have been badly decomposed at that point. It wouldn't have been at the very end of the decomposition process, but it would have been badly decomposed. But Leigh's decomposition process was slowed down, suggesting that she had been kept in a cool room or fridge or something. And when Donovan was asked about where Leigh was kept this whole time and why her decomposition process was slowed down, Donovan didn't provide an answer to the police. The police also believe that Donovan was not working alone. They believe that no less than 5 people were involved, but there just wasn't enough evidence to charge all the people that were suspected to have been involved in this crime. First, the police suspected one of Donovan's friends who had multiple phone call conversations with him minutes before the abduction. And secondly, on the day of the abduction, a few minutes after the abduction actually, Donovan called Yashika, who then left her workplace with no reason. And a couple of minutes after leaving her workplace, her phone pinged in Walkerville, which was the second place that Leigh's phone also pinged at. So I don't think this is a coincidence at all. Thirdly, there was also another one of Donovan's friends who owned a mortuary, and this would explain where Leigh's body was kept this whole time and how her decomposition process was slowed down. And upon this investigation, this morgue was shut down. And even though the police suspected these 3 people, there was not enough evidence to arrest them, and they also swear that they had no involvement, so of course they weren't charged. Donovan Moodley pleaded guilty to all 3 charges: murder, kidnapping, and extortion, and he was given 1 life sentence for the murder of Leigh Matthews, 25 years for her kidnapping, and 10 years for extortion. And despite his multiple attempts to appeal, his sentence was upheld. He is currently serving his sentence at the Johannesburg prison, also known as Sun City. This case was so heartbreaking and shocking. I personally always feel safe on campus because there's multiple security guards all over campus. So after reading this case, I was really scared. Literally anything can happen wherever you are. So please stay safe and try to carry protective stuff. Anyways, that brings us to the end of today's case. I want to hear what you guys think about this case in the comment section down below, and don't forget to like this video and leave your case suggestions in the comment section, and also subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys in my next one.